Welcome back to the channel, everyone. And today we're diving deep into something that I believe separates the truly successful pigeon fanciers from those who are just getting by, and that's feeding. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Feeding? Really? How complicated can it be? You put some grain in a hopper, the birds eat it, done. But if you stick with me through this video, I'm going to show you why feeding is actually one of the most sophisticated aspects of pigeon racing, and why the top fanciers around the world treat it like the performance science that it truly is. I've been in this sport for over 30 years now, and I've had the privilege of visiting some of the best lofts in Europe, Asia, and here in North America. I've sat down with fanciers who consistently win at the highest levels, and I can tell you that every single one of them has a feeding program that's been refined over years, sometimes decades of careful observation and experimentation. These aren't people who just throw some corn and peas in a bowl and hope for the best. They understand that what goes into their birds directly translates to what comes out of them in terms of performance. Let me start by telling you about something I witnessed a few years ago that really opened my eyes to how differently top fanciers think about feeding. I was visiting a champion fancier in Belgium, a man who's won multiple national races and whose birds regularly finish in the top positions in some of the toughest competitions in the world. I expected to see some exotic, expensive feeding program with all sorts of supplements and special mixtures. Instead, what I found was something much more sophisticated. A feeding system that was tailored not just to racing season, but to individual weeks, individual races, even individual birds. This fancier showed me his feed room, and it looked more like a pharmacy than a storage area. He had dozens of different grains, each stored in climate-controlled conditions, each serving a specific purpose in his overall feeding strategy. But what really impressed me wasn't the variety of ingredients, it was how precisely he used them. He could tell me exactly why he fed a certain mixture 3 weeks before a big race, how he adjusted the protein content based on a weather forecast, and why he switched to a completely different feeding approach for the final week before basketing. That's when I realized that feeding isn't just about nutrition. It's about timing, it's about understanding your birds as athletes, and it's about recognizing that what works for one type of race might be completely wrong for another type of race. And this brings me to one of the biggest differences I see between average fanciers and top performers, how they adjust their feeding based on the type of competition they're preparing for. Let's talk about one-loft races first, because the feeding approach for these events is completely different from club racing. In a one-loft race, you're sending your young birds away for months, sometimes half a year or more. You have absolutely no control over what they're being fed once they leave your loft. This means your feeding program before they go is absolutely critical, because you're essentially front-loading all the nutrition and conditioning that bird is going to need for the entire competition. The top one-loft race competitors, I know, start adjusting their feeding program from the moment those young birds are weaned. They're not just trying to grow healthy birds, they're trying to build what I like to call nutritional resilience. These birds need to be able to maintain their condition and performance even when they're switched to a completely different feeding program at the race loft. This means feeding for muscle development, yes, but also for digestive health, immune system strength, and metabolic efficiency. The protein levels in a good one-loft preparation program are typically higher than what you'd use for club racing, usually around 18 to 20% protein during the key development months. But it's not just about crude protein numbers. The quality and type of protein matters enormously. Top one-loft competitors understand that different protein sources serve different purposes. The protein in legumes like peas and beans is excellent for muscle development, but it's also harder to digest and creates more metabolic waste. The protein in seeds like sunflower and safflower is more easily absorbed but provides different amino acid profiles. Many of the best one-loft fanciers I know create custom mixes that balance these different protein sources throughout the development period. But here's where it gets really interesting. They also understand that you can't just feed high protein right up until the birds leave for the race loft. About 3 to 4 weeks before shipping, the smart fanciers start transitioning their birds to a feeding program that more closely resembles what they expect the birds to receive at the race loft. This prevents the shock of a sudden dietary change and helps ensure the birds maintain their condition during the critical final preparation period. Club racing, on the other hand, requires a completely different approach because you have control over your birds feeding throughout the entire season. This allows for much more precise manipulation of their condition and performance. The best club racers I know treat feeding like a weekly strategy game, adjusting their mixtures based on the distance of the upcoming race, the weather conditions, and the individual condition of their birds. For sprint races, anything under about 200 kilometers, the feeding approach emphasizes quick energy and recovery. These races are like 100-meter dashes in human athletics. The birds need readily available carbohydrates for explosive energy, but they also need to be light and lean. Too much fat, and they're carrying unnecessary weight. Too little carbohydrate, and they don't have the instant energy needed for that final sprint to the loft. The grain mixture for sprint preparation is typically built around high-energy carbohydrates, corn, wheat, barley, with moderate protein levels and relatively low fat content. Many top sprint racers increase the percentage of small grains like millet and darri in their mixtures because these provide quick energy without adding excess weight. The feeding quantity is also carefully controlled. These birds need to go to the race keen and hungry, not heavy and sluggish. Middle-distance racing, roughly 200 to 500 kilometers, requires yet another approach. These races demand both speed and endurance, which means the birds need sustained energy sources along with the ability to maintain their pace over several hours of flight. The feeding strategy shifts toward a more balanced approach with slightly higher fat content for sustained energy, moderate protein for muscle maintenance, and complex carbohydrates that provide steady energy release over time. What I find fascinating about the top middle distance competitors is how they manipulate their feeding in the weeks leading up to big races. They'll often start with a slightly higher protein mixture to ensure the birds are in peak muscle condition, then gradually shift toward higher carbohydrate content as race day approaches. The final few days before basketing, they might switch to an almost pure carbohydrate mixture to maximize the birds' energy stores without weighing them down. Long-distance racing, anything over 500 kilometers, is where feeding becomes most critical and most complex. These birds are going to be flying for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours or more. They need to carry enough energy to sustain that level of effort, but they also need to be able to access and utilize that energy efficiently throughout the flight. The best long-distance fanciers understand that fat is the premium fuel for extended flight. Fat provides more than twice the energy per gram compared to carbohydrates, and it burns more efficiently during sustained exercise. But you can't just load birds up with high-fat seeds and expect good results. The bird's digestive system needs to be adapted to processing and utilizing fat efficiently, and this adaptation takes time. Many top long-distance competitors start increasing the fat content in their mixtures weeks before the racing season even begins. They'll include more sunflower seeds, safflower, hemp, and other oil-rich seeds in their daily mixtures. But they also understand that different fat sources have different properties. Sunflower seeds provide readily available energy, but can be heating in hot weather. Safflower is cooling and provides sustained energy, but takes more energy to digest. Hemp seeds are incredibly nutritious, but can be too rich if overfed. The timing of feeding becomes absolutely crucial for long-distance racing. These birds might be basketed on Friday evening and not released until Sunday morning. They need to have their energy stores fully loaded when they go into the basket, but they also need to maintain their appetite and digestive function during the stressful basketing period. This is where the real art of feeding comes in. Most successful long-distance fanciers start loading their birds with carbohydrates about a week before basketing. This is similar to carb loading in human endurance sports. The bird's muscles and liver store glycogen, the readily available form of carbohydrate energy, and these stores need to be maximized before the race. But glycogen storage is limited, so the birds also need adequate fat reserves for the long haul. The day before basketing is critical. Many fanciers make the mistake of either overfeeding or underfeeding at this crucial time. Overfeeding can leave birds heavy and sluggish, with food still in their crop when they go into the basket. Underfeeding can leave them without adequate energy reserves for the race. The best fanciers have figured out the exact timing and quantity that works for their birds, usually a moderate feeding of high-energy, easily digestible grains about 12 to 18 hours before basketing. Now, let's talk about the specific grains and what they actually do in the bird's body, because understanding this is what separates knowledgeable fanciers from those who are just following someone else's feeding chart. Every grain serves a purpose, and the top fanciers know exactly why they're including each ingredient in their mixtures. Corn is probably the most important carbohydrate source in most racing mixtures. It's high in energy, relatively easy to digest, and provides both quick and sustained energy release. But not all corn is the same. Small kernel corn is easier for pigeons to digest and provides quicker energy release. Large kernel corn takes more energy to digest but provides more sustained energy. The best racers often use different types of corn depending on the race distance and the timing within their feeding program. Wheat is another crucial carbohydrate source, but behaves differently than corn in the bird's digestive system. Wheat tends to provide more sustained energy release and is excellent for building muscle glycogen stores. It's particularly valuable in the weeks leading up to long-distance races. However, wheat can be harder to digest than corn, especially for young birds or birds that aren't in peak condition. Barley is often overlooked, but it's an excellent grain for racing pigeons. It provides steady energy release, is generally easy to digest, and has a cooling effect that makes it valuable during hot weather racing. Many European fanciers use barley as a significant component of their summer racing mixtures. Peas and beans are the primary protein sources in most racing mixtures, but they serve functions beyond just providing protein. The complex carbohydrates in legumes provide sustained energy, and the fiber aids in digestive health. But legumes also create more metabolic waste than other grains, which is why you see top fanciers reducing legume content in the final days before basketing. They want their bird systems as clean as possible for the race. Different types of peas and beans provide different benefits. Maple peas are high in protein and generally easy to digest. Tares are extremely high in protein, but can be too rich for some birds. Black-eyed peas provide excellent protein with less digestive stress. The best fanciers often use different legumes at different times in their feeding program, understanding how each type affects their birds. Oil seeds like sunflower, safflower, and hemp are where the feeding programs of top fanciers really differentiate themselves from average competitors. These seeds are extremely high in fat and provide the sustained energy that's crucial for long-distance racing. But they require careful management because they can easily be overfed. Sunflower seeds are probably the most commonly used oil seed, but they're also the most likely to be misused. Fed in the right quantities and at the right times, sunflower seeds can significantly improve a bird's endurance and condition. Overfed, they can make birds too heavy, too fat, and sluggish. Most successful fanciers use sunflower seeds as a percentage of their mixture rather than as a separate feeding, and they adjust that percentage based on the race distance and the bird's individual condition. Safflower seeds are becoming increasingly popular among top competitors because they provide excellent sustained energy without the heating effect of sunflower seeds. They're particularly valuable for hot weather racing and for birds that tend to get too excited or hot on sunflower seeds. Hemp seeds are incredibly nutritious, but also incredibly rich. A little goes a long way, and many fanciers who try hemp seeds for the first time make the mistake of feeding too much. Used correctly, hemp can improve both condition and performance significantly. Used incorrectly, it can make birds too fat and lazy. Now let's talk about supplements because this is an area where I see a lot of confusion and where the marketing often gets ahead of the science. The supplement industry in pigeon racing has exploded in recent years, with products promising everything from improved performance to better health to faster recovery. Some of these products are genuinely beneficial when used correctly. Many others are expensive ways to make your bird's droppings more colorful. The top fanciers I know are generally quite conservative with supplements. They understand that a well-balanced grain mixture provides most of what healthy birds need, and they use supplements strategically rather than routinely. They also understand that supplements are exactly that, supplements to a good feeding program, not replacements for proper nutrition. Vitamins and minerals are the most commonly used supplements, and they can be beneficial, especially during periods of stress like racing season or molting. But the key is understanding that birds' vitamin and mineral needs vary based on their activity level, their breeding status, and the quality of their base diet. A bird eating a varied, high-quality grain mixture in moderate quantities probably needs fewer vitamin supplements than a bird eating a monotonous diet or a bird that's being heavily raced. Probiotics have become very popular in recent years, and there's good scientific evidence that they can be beneficial for digestive health and immune function. The digestive system of a racing pigeon is under constant stress during the racing season, and maintaining healthy gut bacteria can improve both performance and recovery. But probiotics are living organisms, and many commercial products have questionable viability by the time they reach your birds. The best fanciers I know often create their own probiotic cultures using natural fermentation processes, or they source their probiotics from suppliers who can guarantee the viability and concentration of beneficial bacteria. They also understand that probiotics work best when combined with prebiotics, the fiber and complex carbohydrates that feed beneficial bacteria. Electrolytes are crucial during hot weather racing and after long, hard races. Birds lose electrolytes through their respiratory system and through their droppings, and these need to be replaced for proper muscle function and recovery. But electrolyte supplementation needs to be carefully managed. Too much can actually impair performance, and the wrong balance of minerals can cause more problems than it solves. Oil supplements are used by many top competitors, particularly for long-distance racing. Small amounts of high-quality oils can improve the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, provide essential fatty acids, and add concentrated energy to the diet. But oils are easily oxidized and can become rancid quickly, especially in hot weather. The best fanciers use fresh, high-quality oils in small quantities and store them properly to maintain their nutritional value. Now let's talk about timing, because when you feed is often as important as what you feed. The digestive system of a pigeon operates on a fairly predictable schedule, and understanding this schedule allows you to optimize both performance and health. Pigeons naturally feed most heavily in the early morning, and again in the late afternoon or early evening. This mirrors their natural feeding behavior in the wild, and it's generally the most efficient way to feed racing pigeons as well. Morning feeding provides energy for the day's activities, while evening feeding allows for overnight digestion and nutrient absorption. But race preparation requires more sophisticated timing. The final meal before basketing should be timed so that the bird's crop is empty when they go into the basket, but their energy stores are fully loaded. This usually means feeding about 12 to 18 hours before basketing, depending on the bird's individual digestion rate and the type of feed being offered. Water management is something that many fanciers overlook, but the top competitors understand that water is just as important as feed. Racing pigeons need access to clean, fresh water at all times, but the quality and even the temperature of that water can affect performance. During hot weather, birds will drink much more water and may actually prefer slightly cool water to help regulate their body temperature. During cold weather, taking the chill off the water can encourage birds to drink adequately. Some fanciers add electrolytes or vitamins to their birds' water, but this should be done carefully because it can reduce water consumption if the taste becomes unpalatable. The hardness and mineral content of water can also affect bird health and performance. Very soft water may not provide adequate minerals, while very hard water can interfere with the absorption of some nutrients. Many successful fanciers test their water periodically and adjust their feeding program based on the mineral content of their water supply. Grit is another component that's often misunderstood. Pigeons need insoluble grit to help grind grain in their gizzards, and they need soluble grit to provide calcium and other minerals. But the type and size of grit matters, and so does the timing of when it's offered. During racing season, many top fanciers offer grit on a limited basis rather than keeping it available at all times. They want their birds to have adequate grit for proper digestion, but they don't want birds to consume excessive amounts, which can add unnecessary weight and potentially cause digestive problems. The size of grit particles should match the size of grains being fed. Birds eating large grains like corn need larger grit particles, while birds eating small seeds need correspondingly smaller grit. The best fanciers often provide custom grit mixes that match their feeding programs. Let me talk about some of the common mistakes I see, because understanding what not to do is often as important as knowing what to do. One of the biggest mistakes is treating all birds the same. Even birds from the same family can have different nutritional needs, different digestion rates, and different responses to various feeds. The top fanciers learn to recognize these individual differences and adjust their feeding accordingly. Overfeeding is probably the most common error, especially among newer fanciers who think more is always better. Fat birds don't fly well, and birds with excess body weight struggle with both speed and endurance. But underfeeding is just as problematic. Birds without adequate energy reserves can't maintain their performance over long distances or recover properly between races. The key is learning to assess your bird's condition accurately. This comes from handling your birds regularly, observing their behavior and appetite, and learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicate whether a bird is in peak condition, needs more feed, or is carrying too much weight. Feeding the same mixture year-round is another common mistake. A bird's nutritional needs change dramatically throughout the year based on whether they're molting, breeding, racing, or resting. The feeding program that works perfectly during racing season may be completely inappropriate during the molt or off-season. Ignoring the relationship between feeding and training is also problematic. Birds in heavy training need different nutrition than birds that are getting light exercise. Birds preparing for long training tosses need different feeding than birds being prepared for short, fast training flights. Many fanciers also make the mistake of changing their feeding program too frequently or too drastically. Birds' digestive systems need time to adapt to new feeds, and dramatic changes can cause digestive upset that affects performance for days or even weeks. The best fanciers make gradual adjustments and stick with programs that work rather than constantly trying new approaches. Weather-related feeding adjustments are something that separates experienced fanciers from beginners. Hot weather changes birds' energy needs and their ability to digest certain feeds. Cold weather increases energy requirements but may improve appetite. Windy conditions can affect how much energy birds expend during training flights. Humidity affects water consumption and the bird's ability to regulate body temperature. The most successful fanciers I know monitor weather conditions constantly and adjust their feeding programs accordingly. They understand that the same feeding program that produces excellent results in cool, calm conditions may be completely wrong when the weather turns hot and windy. If you're finding this information helpful and you want to improve your own pigeon care knowledge, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. I put a lot of effort into researching and explaining these topics in depth, and your support helps me continue creating this kind of detailed educational content. Now let's talk about the recovery phase after racing, because this is where many fanciers lose birds or compromise their performance for future races. The period immediately after a bird returns from a race is critical for both immediate recovery and long-term health. The first priority is rehydration. Birds returning from races, especially long or difficult races, are often significantly dehydrated. But you can't just provide unlimited water and expect good results. Birds that are severely dehydrated may actually refuse water initially, or they may drink too much too quickly and make themselves sick. The best approach is to provide small amounts of water, possibly with electrolytes, and allow birds to drink gradually. Some fanciers provide slightly sweetened water for the first hour or two after return to help restore blood sugar levels quickly. Recovery feeding should be easily digestible and focused on rapidly available energy sources. Heavy, high-protein feeds can actually slow recovery by requiring too much energy for digestion. Most successful fanciers offer light feeds of easily digestible grains for the first day or two after a race, then gradually return to their normal feeding program. The timing of recovery feeding is also important. Birds returning late in the day may be too stressed or tired to eat immediately. Forcing feed on exhausted birds can actually be counterproductive. It's often better to ensure they have access to water and allow them to rest, then offer feed when they show natural appetite. Let me share something that really changed my perspective on feeding, the realization that feeding is ultimately about energy management, not just nutrition. Racing pigeons are athletes, and like human athletes, their performance depends on having the right amount of energy available at the right time. This means understanding not just what different feeds provide, but when that energy becomes available to the bird. Simple carbohydrates provide quick energy, but don't last long. Complex carbohydrates provide more sustained energy, but take longer to digest. Fats provide the most concentrated energy, but require the most effort to metabolize. The art of feeding racing pigeons lies in timing these different energy sources so that birds have quick energy available for training and racing, sustained energy for long flights, and adequate reserves for recovery and maintenance. This requires understanding not just nutrition, but also the bird's digestive physiology and the demands of different types of racing. I want to talk about seasonal feeding adjustments because this is an area where I see a lot of confusion. The nutritional needs of racing pigeons change dramatically throughout the year, and feeding programs need to be adjusted accordingly. During the off-season, birds need adequate nutrition to maintain health and complete their annual molt, but they don't need the high-energy, performance-oriented feeding required during racing season. Overfeeding during the off-season can lead to birds becoming too fat and lazy, making it much harder to get them into racing condition when the season begins. Pre-season conditioning requires gradually increasing the energy content and quantity of feed as birds begin training. This parallels the gradual increase in training distance and intensity. Birds that are suddenly switched from off-season feeding to full racing rations without adequate conditioning often develop digestive problems or fail to reach peak condition. Peak racing season feeding is the most intensive and requires the most careful management. Feed quality, quantity, and timing all become critical factors in performance. This is when the difference between good feeding and great feeding becomes most apparent in race results. Post-season recovery feeding helps birds transition from the stress of racing season back to maintenance levels of nutrition while supporting the molt and recovery process. This transition needs to be gradual to avoid digestive upset and to ensure birds maintain adequate body condition through the molt. The molt itself presents unique nutritional challenges. Feather production requires high levels of protein and specific amino acids, but molting birds are generally less active and don't need the high energy levels required during racing season. Balancing these competing needs requires understanding both feather physiology and the bird's overall energy requirements. Environmental factors in your loft also affect feeding requirements. Birds in well-ventilated, temperature-controlled environments have different energy needs than birds in lofts subject to temperature extremes. Birds in crowded conditions may have different stress levels and corresponding nutritional needs compared to birds in more spacious accommodations. The quality of your feed storage affects the nutritional value of even the best grain mixtures. Grains stored in hot, humid conditions lose nutritional value rapidly and may develop mold or rancidity that can actually harm your birds. Proper storage in cool, dry, pest-free conditions is essential for maintaining feed quality. Many successful fanciers invest in climate-controlled feed storage and rotate their grain supplies regularly to ensure freshness. They also understand that buying cheaper, lower-quality grains is often false economy if it results in poorer bird condition or performance. Let me share some specific examples of how top fanciers adjust their feeding for different situations, because concrete examples often illustrate these principles better than abstract explanations. I know a very successful sprint racer who feeds a mixture that's about 60% corn, 20% small grains like millet and dari, 15% legumes, and 5% oil seeds during his peak racing season. But 3 days before each race, he switches to a mixture that's almost 80% small grains and corn, with very little protein and minimal fat. His birds go to the races light, keen, and full of quick energy. Contrast that with a champion long-distance racer I know who feeds a mixture that's only about 40% corn and wheat with 25% legumes, 20% barley and other sustained energy grains, and 15% oil seeds. His birds carry more weight, but it's useful weight in the form of muscle and energy reserves that sustain them through 8-hour flights. Both of these approaches work brilliantly for their intended purposes, but they would be disasters if reversed. The sprint racer's feeding program wouldn't provide adequate sustained energy for long-distance racing, while the long-distance program would leave sprint racers too heavy and slow for competitive short-distance racing. Water management also varies between these successful fanciers. The sprint racer provides constant access to fresh water, but may restrict water for a few hours before basketing to ensure his birds aren't carrying excess water weight. The long-distance racer ensures his birds are fully hydrated before long races and provides electrolyte-enhanced water after difficult races. I want to address something that comes up frequently in discussions about feeding, the role of natural versus commercial feed mixtures. Many fanciers ask whether they should mix their own feeds or use commercial racing mixtures, and the answer depends on several factors. Commercial mixtures offer convenience and consistency, and the best commercial feeds are formulated by animal nutritionists who understand pigeon physiology. However, commercial feeds are formulated for average conditions and average birds. They may not be optimal for your specific racing program, your local conditions, or your individual birds. The most successful fanciers I know use commercial feeds as a starting point but modify them based on their specific needs. They might add additional oil seeds for long-distance racing, increase the protein content during molting season, or adjust the grain sizes based on their birds' preferences and digestive efficiency. Mixing your own feeds gives you complete control over ingredients and allows for precise adjustments based on your bird's performance and condition. However, it requires significant knowledge about nutrition and grain quality, as well as access to high-quality ingredients. Many top fanciers compromise by using high-quality commercial mixtures as their base feed and adding specific ingredients to customize the mixture for their needs. This provides the convenience and nutritional balance of commercial feeds while allowing for the customization that can make the difference between good and great performance. The economics of feeding is something that many fanciers struggle with, especially those who are trying to compete at high levels while managing costs. High-quality feeds and supplements are expensive, and it's tempting to cut corners to save money. However, the top competitors I know universally agree that feeding is not the place to economize. The cost of high-quality feed is insignificant compared to the cost of replacing birds that are lost due to poor condition or the opportunity cost of birds that underperform due to inadequate nutrition. That said, expensive doesn't always mean better. Some of the most successful feeding programs I've seen use relatively simple grain mixtures with careful attention to quality, timing, and individual bird management rather than exotic ingredients or expensive supplements. The key is understanding what your birds actually need versus what marketing materials suggest they need. A bird in good health eating a well-balanced grain mixture may need very few supplements, while a bird under stress or in poor condition may benefit from targeted nutritional support. Before I wrap up, I want to emphasize something that I think gets lost in all the technical discussion about grain types and feeding schedules: the importance of observation and individual bird management. The best feeding program in the world won't work if you're not paying attention to how your individual birds respond to it. This means handling your birds regularly, observing their condition and behavior, and learning to recognize the subtle signs that indicate whether your feeding program is working. A bird that's losing condition despite adequate feeding may have health issues that need addressing. A bird that's gaining too much weight may need reduced rations or increased exercise. The most successful fanciers I know are constantly evaluating and adjusting their feeding programs based on their bird's response. They keep detailed records of what they feed, when they feed it, and how their birds perform. This allows them to identify patterns and continuously refine their approach. They also understand that feeding is just one component of a comprehensive management program. The best feeding in the world won't compensate for poor loft conditions, inadequate training, or health problems. But when combined with good overall management, proper feeding can make the difference between mediocre results and championship performance. If you're working on developing your own feeding program, I'd encourage you to start with a proven base mixture from a reputable supplier, then make gradual adjustments based on your bird's response and your specific racing goals. Keep detailed records of what you feed and how your birds perform, and don't be afraid to seek advice from successful fanciers in your area. I'd also love to hear about your own feeding experiences in the comments below. What feeding strategies have worked best for your birds? Have you noticed differences in how individual birds respond to different feeds? What challenges have you faced in developing an effective feeding program? Your experiences and questions help all of us learn and improve our bird management. Remember, feeding racing pigeons is both an art and a science. The scientific principles of nutrition provide the foundation, but the art lies in applying those principles to your specific birds, your specific racing program, and your specific conditions. The top fanciers understand both the science and the art, and they never stop learning and refining their approach. Thanks for sticking with me through this detailed exploration of feeding strategies. If you found this information valuable, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss future videos where we'll continue diving deep into the management practices that separate successful fanciers from the rest. Until next time, keep learning, keep observing your birds, and remember that every small improvement in your management can translate to better performance on race day.